all of the Marvel villains within the multiversal saga are actually looking at their redemption arcs, and I am here for it. Whether it's Wanda Maximoff, who's evolving through her eternal child arc, Loki, who's traversing his many-faced god villain arc, or even Peter Parker, who, as codependent as he is therefore oscillating through the vengeful martyr arc. These stories are profound spiritual lessons, and they can help us on our spiritual journeys. Oh, I'm Christina Wiltsey, and I'm a psychic channel, a life alchemist, and a story aficionado. Whether it's movies, books, pages, whatever it is, I love to weave narratives that we see on screen and page into tools for spiritual growth. I believe that the Marvel multiverse saga, despite its flaws, has gifted us something extraordinary: the redemption of villains. This isn't just entertainment, it is shadow work in the form of blockbuster mainstream movies and televisions. Let me explain. So, do you remember when villains were simply villains before Disney reimagined every antagonist into a misunderstood anti-hero? Once upon a time, Maleficent was purely malicious, and Cruella was just cruel, and Scar wasn't Taka, the sensitive brother vying for affection and approval. But now, empathy is woven into their stories, and this cultural shift has sparked both praise and criticism. Some argue that these redemption arcs therapize characters who would remain unredeemed otherwise. Others, however, see this evolution as an acknowledgement of the truth expressed by the father of internal family systems, Dick Schwartz, when he says that there are no bad parts, meaning that evil people don't just exist. We just have misunderstood and unaccounted for parts inside of us that need to get in line and stop being in charge. By understanding that hurt people, we can open a door for compassion for others and ourselves. We can also acknowledge that possibly Disney and Marvel are looking at ways to stretch out recognizable names, but let's go with it. So, I have spent nearly a decade helping clients identify villains within us. And these go beyond Dick Schwartz's parts or any other parts work, or even the magnets of the law of attraction. Over time, I've developed a framework that identify 9 archetypal villains and their universes that lie within us. And I have worked with people to move them through the arcs of each of these villains, whether it is the perfectionist, the pleaser, the defensive, the eternal child. All of these maladaptive behaviors align with shadow work themes in our lives and are placed on one of these 9 arcs. These arcs exist in movies, in myths, and everyday experiences. If you hear this and question whether or not you're villainous, just consider how different lenses could turn a hero easily into a villain or vice versa. Could Voldemort's fear of death and betrayal make him sympathetic? Could Superman in his codependency become a tyrant? These arcs reveal that heroes and villains are often 2 sides of the same coin. So we're going to look specifically today at Loki, also known as the many-faced god villain, and show how Loki's redemption arc isn't just a fan favorite, it is a masterclass in shadow work and character evolution. Through his journey, Loki navigates the archetypes of the many-faced god, a progression from shadow, Pinnacle villain, to light, the legend. And as a quick side note, I just want to also mention that the villain arcs and the 9 villains themselves correspond with both the Enneagram, the Primal Wounds system by Lisa Bourbeau that we evolved on the This Spiritual Fix podcast, as well as the 9 centers of human design. Loki, as the many-faced god, represents the 7 in the Enneagram, the father wound in the evolved Primal Wounds system, and the deconditioning of the throat center in human design. So if you follow any of those, you can go and you can say, this arc is how I decondition my conditioned throat center. Or this is how I move to my best expression of the 7, and this is how I heal my father wound. So, let me explain the arc first. Every single one of these arcs moves from the worst version, which is the Pinnacle villain, all the way to the best and most equanimous and enlightened version of this arc, which is the legend. The Pinnacle villain then moves down to the successful antagonist. The successful antagonist is usually somebody who has a pretty good strategy and they're not considered awful, but it's still pretty bad. we see that there's then the wounded child. This is usually the origin point and where anybody enters into this arc. The wounded child is what created the strategy that led you on this arc in the first place. From there, we move down to the covert form of this arc, and the covert form is the one that a lot of people have when they don't consider themselves toxic. They just want to be able to move out of it. A classic example is a people pleaser or a entertainer and jokester. We then have the hero, and the hero is the one who is able to fully understand and realize that they have work to do, and they're willing to do it. When the hero achieves whatever they want or whatever it is that they're aiming for and they come to rest, that's when they become the legend. When they just ante up and they really just like level up even more, they become the legend. So let's look at this arc in particular. The many-faced god, if we see them in their pinnacle villain form, they are the many-faced god. They are completely deceptive, consumed by the need to prove their worth. They take on any identity necessary to gain power and control over others, and they thrive on manipulation, and they're willing to take power from anyone or dominate everyone. Next, the successful antagonist is the thief. The thief of this particular arc is willing to take attention and power through any underhanded means possible. They may not be as overt as the pinnacle villain, but they might steal credit for anyone else's work or dominate conversations to draw attention to themselves. They are primarily concerned with getting attention to themselves, getting power and recognition and external validation from other people. When we move over to the wounded child, we see that the wounded child of this arc is the defensive. Have you ever met, or are you somebody who is very, very defensive? Who, if you're incredibly sensitive to critique because you feel as if you've been critiqued your whole life, and yet you've probably spent a lot of effort actually trying to craft a persona that as many people as possible like. You're trying on new identities all the time, and so you get very defensive when somebody critiques you. The covert villain in this particular arc is the entertainer. The entertainer, they mask their intentions and their lack of self-worth with humor and charm. They are constantly cracking jokes, distracting others in order to avoid deeper truths. Their goal is to keep others off guard and entertained by any means necessary. Moving into the hero. The hero of this particular arc is the sun, and it is a play on words because this is the father wound in healing, but it's also the sun because it represents the center of your solar system. You have all of these different personas, all of these different identities, and your job as the sun is to finally go into the center of your sun and find your stillness and find your own self-worth within and stop looking for external validation in order to be able to do it. The next, and the legend, the final one, is the Fabricator. It's a figure that represents integration and mastery, someone who takes all the identities and experiences that they've encountered and they transform them into something new. As a Renaissance figure, as a polymath, they transcend the need for external recognition or power, and instead, they use their abilities to do the right thing, creating beauty and meaning in their gifts. So this framework illustrates the journey from the depths of villainy to the heights of personal transformation and mastery, blending shadow work with creativity. So, if you have identified yourself as a many-faced god villain, that this is something that you struggle with, pay attention to how Loki moves through his arc. The pinnacle villain, the many-faced god. Loki embodies pure deception when he is in his worst form. His identity is fractured and he takes on different personas to manipulate, deceive, and dominate, and his hunger for recognition and power drives his every move. But underneath lies a desperate need to prove his own worth. The primary example is in the original Thor. Loki's grand deception culminates in him attempting to destroy Jotunheim to prove himself superior, not just to Thor, but to his true heritage. His facade crumbles when Odin rejects his methods, leaving him dangling on the Bifrost Bridge, crying out, "I did it for you, Father!
I could have done it, Father! I could have done it! For you!"
Here we can see the father wound as it shows up in this particular arc. In the Avengers in 2012, Loki fully embraces this pinnacle villain role. His attack on Earth with the Chitauri army showcases his desire to be feared and revered.
No stopping it. There is only the war.
Loki's infamous kneel speech reveals his belief in dominance as a path to validation.
You were made to be ruled.
Next, we have Loki as the thief, the successful antagonist part of this particular arc. Loki refines his manipulation techniques, stealing attention, power, and trust to further his goals. As the thief, he is more calculated. He's willing to adopt any persona or identity in order to achieve his ends. This represents a less extreme version of the Pinnacle villain as the successful antagonist. In the Avengers, in 2012, Loki's theft of the Tesseract and his use of the Mind Stone to control others epitomizes this archetype. He becomes an architect of chaos, and he's bending people's will to his own. He's literally thieving other people and other bodies in order to achieve his means. In Thor Ragnarok in 2017, Loki initially positions himself as the ruler of Asgard, stealing Odin's throne through illusion. However, his deception is exposed by Thor, and he begins to realize the emptiness of his actions.
I'll see you on the other side, brother.
All right, I yield.
Next, we have the covert form of how Loki shows up. As we move through this arc, we can see that Loki is starting to begin to see himself. But throughout all of the stories, no matter when it is, his wit and charm always hides a very, very deep insecurity, the entertainer. This is where the covert form of a villain and our inner villainy really shows itself, because it's not considered that bad. It's maybe charming, or it's maybe, oh, this is actually a really nice thing that you do. Loki uses his humor and spectacle to mask his pain and win approval. This covert form of villainy shows Loki struggling to balance his need for connection and his fear of vulnerability. In Thor Ragnarok, Loki's get help gag with Thor highlights his willingness to play the clown for attention and approval. This stage also marks a turning point as he begins to forge a genuine connection with Thor. In Loki Season 1, Loki charms Mobius and the TVA staff, using his charisma to manipulate his way out of trouble. Interestingly though, Mobius always sees through it.
He's lying. Just playing games. There's no one out there.
And his walls begin to crack as Mobius actually asks Loki to look at himself and see his patterns of betrayal.
Do you enjoy hurting people? Making them feel small? Making them feel afraid?
We can see that all of Loki's motivations are oftentimes showed up in the criticism that everyone has always had of Loki, his wounded child. He becomes defensive of himself so many different times, always trying to push the blame on something else, which reflects a pattern of feeling as if he is inadequate in and of himself. So Loki's defensiveness and volatility stemmed from his unhealed wounds. As the wounded child, he reacts to criticism or rejection by lashing out or retreating into different identities. This stage reveals Loki's deep fear of abandonment and his struggle to find stability. In Thor: The Dark World, Loki's grief over Frigga's death drives him into a spiral of rage and self-loathing. He reacts defensively, blaming others for his pain and using deception to mask his vulnerability. His breakdown in his cell is a poignant moment of raw emotion. In Loki Season 1, Loki's interactions with Sylvie, his variant, highlight his defensiveness. When Sylvie challenges his motives, Loki deflects by questioning her trustworthiness. Their mutual distrust mirrors Loki's inner conflict.
I'm not gonna get very far if you keep trying to kill me every 30
Well,
seconds.
you're full of it because you need me to get that thing recharged. You're not a serious man.
You're right. I'm a god.
You're a clown.
That is the brilliance of the TVA storyline in Loki. We get to see Loki's internal battles with all of his many faces as if they are external. It's almost as if the TVA exists within him in the same way that we face the same inner balance battles within ourselves. He has to confront his many faces and reunite them.
Hello. Which one of us are you?
We see Loki finally move into the sun when we move fully into Loki Season 1 and 2. He begins to step into his true power, shedding his reliance on deception and external validation. As the sun, he finds his center and starts to act from a place of authenticity rather than manipulation. The stage is about stillness and clarity. In Loki Season 1, Loki's transformation begins as he chooses to work with Sylvie to uncover the truth about the TVA. He starts to let go of his need for control, showing vulnerability and a willingness to trust, and even love. even if it is himself. But what we start to recognize is that actually this entire journey is about self-love. Even if it's depicted in Loki as him loving a variant of himself, we can recognize that our need to love the different parts of ourselves and the different aspects of our villainous, many-faced god behavior is the key to becoming the sun. In Thor Ragnarok, Loki returns to Asgard to fight alongside Thor against Hela. In one of his most heroic moments, he arrives with the Asgardian army to evacuate the citizens, and he embraces his role as a protector.
Your savior is here!
So, let's see Loki move into the Fabricator, the final stage, the legendary stage, which he does so brilliantly in Loki season 2. It makes me feel so good. It's just such a beautiful depiction. The final stage of Loki's arcs is his ascension to the Fabricator. Here, he integrates all aspects of his identity and creates something entirely new. Loki becomes a figure of balance and purpose, and he weaves together the threads of life into a legacy that transcends his past. In Loki season 2, Loki sacrifices his personal desires to take control of the multiverse's timelines.
I know what I want. I know what kind of god I need to be.
He transforms into the god of stories, which symbolizes his mastery over his many faces, no longer seeking power for its own sake, but wielding it for the greater good. Not only does this have a perfect ending to the many-faced god villain arc, but it also reflects the original mythology of the archetypal Trickster, who moves from being the chaos bringer to the wisdom keeper. The Fabricator is the wisdom keeper. They are creating an understanding that when they look inside themselves and love themselves, they are capable of wielding time itself for the greater good. It is incredible. So, by the end of Loki season 2, he embodies this transformation. He has become the Fabricator. He holds the universes and the multiverse together with compassion and purpose. So Loki's arc is more than just a redemption story. It is a blueprint for all of us for a personal transformation, especially if this arc and any of the roles inside of it really resonate with you. His journey from the many-faced god to the Fabricator reflects the inner work we all must do to heal our wounds. Integrate our identities, seek out our still powerful center, and step into our highest potential. Villain redemption arcs like Loki's offer us a mirror to examine our own shadow work. And as Marvel Multiverse continues to explore these themes, I believe they'll inspire us to rethink not just the villains, but heroes too. You know, as above, so below, as we say as alchemists, and what we see on the screen often mirrors the spiritual lessons unfolding within us. So start to pay attention. For me, this work is so monumental to both me and my clients, and I really encourage you to start using as many tools as you possibly can for clues about how to move through your own shadow work if that is the path that you are on. So the question I ask you is, did anything on this arc resonate with you? Let me know in the comments. We are going to be going through and giving examples of every single one of the arcs. Next time, we are going to be talking about the Eternal Child through the lens of Wanda Maximoff and all of the amazing things that she's done in the last couple of years, especially in the multiverse saga. This particular Eternal Child being the equivalent of the Peter Pan, or as I used to affectionately call it, the Norman Bates villain arc. And we'll be looking at that next time. So let me know if you like it. Please like and follow and comment if you want to hear more. And please ask any questions that you have for clarity's sake. This is a lot of information told through the wonderful stories of the Marvel Multiverse. Thanks, y'all.